Okay, welcome to the third seminar series that OLA is presenting this year. It's entitled Our Beautiful Lakes, Past and Present. Presenters for this session are Jamila Baig from the University of Oregon, Casie Smith with USGS, Ron Larson, that's me. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, retired, and I'm also on the OLA board. Dorothy Hall with the University of Maryland and the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and Judy Sims, who is a lake owner. The Oregon Lakes Association wishes to say that we appreciate the sponsorships of these organizations and businesses, and we hope that they continue to do so. We also would appreciate if you're not a member of the Oregon Lakes Association, that you would join. Moving on to the first presentation, it's going to be not me, but Jamila Baig, and she's a PhD candidate at the University of Oregon and a 2021 OLA Scholarship recipient. And the title of her talk is A Multiproxy Approach to Reconstruct Paleotemperature, Vegetation Change, Fire History, and Lake Productivity in the Pacific Northwest, Gold Lake, Willamette National Forest, Oregon.
Ron, you need to give up screen ownership.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing.
Yep, good.
Okay, so go ahead, Jamila. There you go.
Jamila, you might be muted.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Is it visible now? Screen is good? Okay, perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me for the Oregon Lake Association as one of the speakers over here. The topic of my presentation that I will be presenting today is actually the project overview of my PhD dissertation that I am currently working on. So before starting into the details about it, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of the people and institutions that helped me to carry out this work. So I would like to extend my thanks for my advisor, Dan Gavin and Pat McDowell, who have been the backbone of my dissertation and the research. And I would like to thank you, University of Oregon, Department of Geography and Department of Environmental Sciences for a big support for all the time till now. And of course, how can I forget to thank you, Oregon Lake Association, and all the board members who selected my proposal to be one of the recipients for this year, and I'm honored to be an Oregon Lake Association scholarship recipient for this year. So going towards the project I'm working on, so this is the part of my PhD dissertation. So I'm a PhD candidate at Environmental Sciences Studies and Policy and Geography as my focal department, and I'm hoping to graduate by the end of next year, probably the winter or maybe the early fall. So winter 2023, hopefully, yeah. And going to the study area that I'm working on. So I'm working on one of the most productive lake in the High Cascade, that's the Goddard Lake. Goddard Lake is a natural mesotrophic lake at an elevation of 1,948 meters above sea level in the Cascade Range. So this is considered as one of the most productive lake in the region. which is located in the Willamette National Forest. So it receives the water from the Salt Creek, which passes through the Gold Lake bog onto the Gold Lake's northeast side. So it's actually at the transitional zone between the Pacific silver fir and the mountain hemlock forest type. So this study is actually aimed to reconstruct paleotemperature, vegetation change, fire history, and lake productivity using the multiple proxies from the Gold Lake. Well, there are several pollen studies in this area, but no work has been done so far in the Oregon to reconstruct paleotemperature based on the chironomids. So chironomids are actually midges, they are which live in the lake. So this study will be the first attempt to reconstruct paleotemperature in the Oregon. So taking multiple proxies will help us to have a complete picture of the climate change and the disturbances that shaped today's vegetation and changes in the temperature. Is the responses and also the responses of these proxies, like the vegetation and the temperature, is different from each other. They respond differently. The time scale is different. So it's really important to have a multi-proxy approach to have a complete picture of the past environment. So it can help us to fill the gaps where one proxy cannot answer. The second proxy can help you to answer those questions which are missing if you are working on a single proxy to answer multiple questions. So as I mentioned earlier, like this is the first time attempt to in Oregon to reconstruct the paleotemperature for the last 15,000 years ago till now using the chironomid head capsules. There are some studies that have been done in United States like California, Colorado, and Utah, and some parts of Nevada. So these are the 4 states where chironomids have been used to reconstruct the temperature. And they have developed their calibration data set, which we can use to infer the temperature for the past time period. With this project, which is where we are including the chironomids from the Gold Lake, we are hoping to work on a separate project as well, where we are looking to include multiple lakes from Oregon, not only from the Oregon, but from the Washington as well, to include those data set into the major calibration data set to have a complete temperature reconstruction that will be used as a model for the remaining parts of the United States. So these pictures, some of these pictures are, which I will describe in detail in the upcoming slides. So in order to give you a project overview, what I'm doing for my dissertation. So the first thing is the first chapter or the data I'm collecting is I'm trying to reconstruct vegetation and fire history with high resolution analysis pre and post Mazama with impact of the tephra. So in order to answer this particular question, I'm working on fossilized pollen, getting from the lake sediment, and also the charcoal that is present in the lake. So charcoal analysis is actually a high resolution analysis where we have processed the samples at every centimeter. I will get into details later on. The second chapter I'm working on, or the project, sub-project of my PhD, is the I'm reconstructing paleolimnological history of Gold Lake. And this is based on the isotopic analysis and total carbon and total nitrogen in order to see how the lake productivity has been changed for the last 15,000 years till now. And the last sub-project, the project that I'm working on is reconstructing the paleotemperature. And this chapter is actually based on the chironomid head capsules that I have processed and working on identification to reconstruct the paleotemperature and getting help from the calibration data sets that's available for the United States. So in order to answer all these questions, 2 parallel lake sediment cores were recovered in June 2018 from the deepest point of the Gold Lake. So this sediment core is very special and I would say unique because it has, we were able to get 13 meters of the sediment core from this lake, and it has a 2 meter of highly laminated sections after the Mazama eruption, which shows the higher sedimentation rate. When we say the laminated or the wharf sections, these are actually the annually deposited lake sediments. Under favorable, if there is the favorable environmental conditions, these wharves are formed due to the, the seasonality of depositional processes from the lake's water column, and it transport, and also the whatever comes from the catchment area. And then subsequent to the deposition of those layers, the physical preservation of these wharves is also important. And in that way, the lake internal environment plays an important role, whether those lamination are preserved or not. So we were lucky to have 2 meters of the highly laminated cores from the Gourd Lake. Okay, so this picture represents the 13-meter section of the Gourd Lake, starting from the top, if you look at the diagram. So this one is from the surface sample going all the way down to the very bottom of the core. So these cores are, sorry, I think I missed one of those. Okay, yeah, sorry. This is the one, yeah. Okay, so this is the 13-meter sediment core of the Gourd Lake. And so for analyzing the vegetational change, we took the, we analyzed 52 samples at every 50 centimeter increment from the sediment were analyzed to see how vegetation has been changed. While the charcoal was analyzed, charcoal samples were analyzed at every centimeter. So we have a high resolution analysis of chart for the Gourd Lake core. And for the isotopic analysis, it was done at every 10 centimeter and at every 5 centimeter pre and post Mazama to see how the lake productivity has been changed over the period of the time. And for temperature reconstruction, we have processed 36 samples of the lake sediment, and they have been processed, they have been identified, and data is being analyzed at this particular time period. So if you look at this diagram, this, as I was mentioning earlier, we were able to get 2 meter, almost 2.2 meter core of the sediment, which is highly laminated. And we were able to count the wharves physically, and we added those counted wharves along with the radiocarbon edges that we got from the sediment. And those wharves are thick and they are really fine. So we were able to compare with the radiocarbon edges, and they fit really well, that I will be able to show you in the next slide. So on the right side, if you look, this is the 78 centimeter of the Mazama tephra that we were able to get from the Gourd Lake, and below Mazama tephra, we got a 4 meter of the sediment after pushing through this Mazama tephra. This one, you can see this is the age depth model for the Gourd Lake. So these are one of the best preserved and most complete core that we got from the Gourd Lake. So it has 3 tephra layers that are preserved in there. So 2 are from the Mount Mazama, which includes the Lalau rock eruption and climatic Mazama. So if you look at this diagram, so you can see the Lalau rock eruption, which occurs almost 150 years before the Mazama eruption occurred. So the Gourd Lake has 1 centimeter of Mazama ash layer in it. And after 20 centimeter of, about 20 centimeter of the Lalau rock eruption, we have 78 centimeter of the Mazama tephra. After Mazama tephra, this region is highly laminated, 2.2 meter of the core, where we counted each wharf at every 10 centimeter increment and added those wharf, the edges into the claim to get the age depth model. So in total, for developing this age depth model, we have 11 radiocarbon dates, and the VARs were also added. So if you look at the after Mazama eruption on the top region, that these 3 radiocarbon dates post-Mazama and 1 radiocarbon date pre-Mazama, which was taken from the Lalau Rock eruption area, those were included as outlier, and we rely mostly on the VARs that we counted for that, and they fit perfectly to each other.
So, Jamila.
Yep. Oh.
Can you finish up in a couple minutes?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I will try to. Okay. I will try to run. Okay. Okay. So just because I didn't look into my timer, I have 2 minutes. So just give you an idea. So the charcoal data has been analyzed using the chart analysis in MATLAB. And it shows like how the chart analysis, how the fire history has been fluctuating over the period of the time. This one, shows the char accumulation rate over the period of time. If you look over the left of side, the 4 zones were created based on the known climatic events like the pre-Younger Dryas, post-Younger Dryas, post-Younger Dryas to pre-Mazama, and then post-Mazama to the recent time period. And there are the different fire frequency fluctuation over the period of the time. So I will not go into the detail. So along with the pollen data that we have, we are hoping to fill this gap because of the research that has been done in the Gold Lake book. There is this data available about until 10,000, 9,529 years before present, but this data is not available in the Gold Lake book. So with the data that we having until like 14,700 years before present, we are able to fill this gap, like what kind of the forest or vegetation was there before this time period. So it will help us to see how the vegetation has been changed. Just to give you an idea, like this is the total, the pollen record from the Gold Lake. This is this data was analyzed at every 50 centimeter, and around Mazama, pre and post Mazama, the resolution was increased to every centimeter. So there is a lot to talk about this, but I will not. So, and then finally, in order to get the paleolimnological history of the Gold Lake, as the organic matter plays an important role in determining the changes in the terrestrial vegetation presence along the lake catchment, aquatic productivity, and all that stuff. So this data, I'm going to present this paper in upcoming AGU conference. So you can join me to listen in detail about this particular chapter. And with that, I would say thank you. And I took a lot. I think I'm running short of time. These are some of the pictures of the lakes in the Himalayan region. I have been working in Pakistan with these lakes. So with that, I would say thank you. And I would say if you have any question, I'm ready to answer those.
Thank you very much, Jamila. That was a great presentation.
Sorry, I ran short of time. I realized, I thought like I will be talk.
So can you get out of screen share?
Sure, I will.
Okay. Okay, are there any questions for Jamila? Well, I have a question. Okay, go ahead.
Ron, I just offer, Jamila, thank you. That makes me want to learn more about Gold Lake. That's a great presentation. You've sparked my curiosity and interest.
Thank you very much. I would love to talk about it later on. There is so much to talk about.
Very good.
Thank you.
So Jamila, were you actually involved with getting that sediment core? Does that require divers to do that, or can you do it from? Was it done from a boat, from the surface, or how do you get this core?
So we use the special the arrangement where we get the we have the platform which we need to fix in the center, like the deepest part of the lake, and then spending 2 days over there with the team members, and then using the piston corer drilling, piston corer pushing down the lake sediment. It took 1 day, a complete day to get those lake sediments. So it was we were able to get a 13 meter of the core, as Mazama Tephra was at 7 meter from the water and sediment interface. So after getting through the 78 centimeter of Mazama Tephra, it was not easy to get there, but having our advisor and all the team members, we were able to get through it, and still we were able to go through Mazama Tephra and 4 meter below Mazama Tephra. So it's a complete record which goes back to the late glacial period, almost 15,000 years before present. It's a complete record.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Well, very good. So are there any other questions?
Jamila, this is Joe Eilers. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are, Joe.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that we have a shallow core over on Diamond Lake that has chironomid head capsule data, if you're interested.
That would be great. I would love to.
So if you want to get in touch with me. And the other thing, I was amazed at how far down your Mazama ash layer was, or Tephra layer. You know, we've cored other lakes in the Cascades and very unproductive lakes, for example, where we only had to go about 50 to 60 centimeters down to get the Mazama layer. So, the fact that your layer is so far down in the system really highlights exactly how productive that system is. So anyway,
right.
Great stuff.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what we are trying to do, because taking all these 3 proxies, working on the isotopic analysis, and then the vegetation history, the fire, and combining all these proxies, the multi-proxy approach is actually helping you to understand what's happening, how the vegetation, how the fire, how the temperature, all are interconnected with each other.
Yeah, it will be great to see you pull it all together.
Yeah, yeah, one day.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next speaker, who is going to be Casie Smith. Casie is an ecologist with the USGS in Bend, and the title of her presentation is A Progression of Understanding of the Turbid Shallow Malheur Lake Restoration Implications. So go ahead, Casie.
All right. Excuse me. Is everybody seeing my screen clearly?
Yep. Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So as Ron mentioned, my name is Casie Smith. I'm an ecologist at the Oregon Water Science Center, and I actually sit in Bend, which is a good position for me to get out to Malheur Lake, which is the focus of this presentation today. So for the past couple of years, I've been working with Tammy Wood, who, if you guys remember from the last call, she's one of the board members now on OLA. And we've been basically focusing on this lake to learn as much as we can about it. This presentation is going to be kind of like a high-level overlook of the main points that we have determined over the past couple of years. And I did want to make sure it was very clear that we couldn't do any of this work without the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and High Desert Partnership down there, our partners that we work closely with. They're also, the partners, everybody is very focused on lake restoration. And so often our studies are focused on answering specific questions about potential lake restoration. All right, so to follow our session topic today, our beautiful lakes past and present, I'm going to start with the past, and I'm going to provide a quick overview and history of Malheur Lake. Anytime I talk about Malheur Lake, by the way, I'm going to outline the body of water that we refer to as Malheur Lake. Then there's also Mud Lake, and then the true terminus of the basin is Harney Lake. And this is all located in southeastern Oregon, which is shown here with this inset. So historically, Malheur Lake was a clear freshwater hemimarsh. And the hemimarsh, what we mean by that is that it's about 50% open water and 50% emergent vegetation. And one of our best resources is this Dubert report from 1969 that shows what we would think here, kind of, Dubert referred to them as islands and peninsulas, where we believe it was kind of like a elevated sediment, you know, a little an accumulation of sediment and then emergent vegetation growing on top of that. So some of the major inputs, or the only inputs I should say, to Malheur Lake is the Sylvies River that comes in from the north, and then the Donner und Blitzen River that comes in from the south. There's also direct precipitation on the surface of the lake, of course. But this is very much a snowmelt driven system. And often in the spring, where people are projecting how much water is going to be in the lake based on the snowtell sites that are located up in the Blue Mountains, which feeds the Sylvies River, and Steens Mountain, which feeds the Blitzen River. One very important factor about Malheur Lake is how it fluctuates widely in size. And so I'm going to move away from the slide briefly and come right back to it. But this map here was made by our coworker that used to be with Fish and Wildlife Service, James Pearson. And this shows a really great depiction of the maximum, mean, and min that's been observed out of the lake in spatial area since about 1972. So the maximum here is about 51,000 hectares that occurred in the 1986 floods. The mean was about 19,000 hectares, and that kind of this lighter gray color here in the middle. And that, it's a little bit high actually compared to what we're seeing more recently. And then also the low here is this little white blob in the middle, and that was about 500 hectares, and that was observed in 1992. However, I have not updated this, but what we observed in 2021, this past summer, was even lower than that. So this is how much the lake can fluctuate. And it obviously creates a lot of different issues, thinking of habitat and water quality, if you can think of the spatial extent. All right, so I also want to talk about how shallow this lake is, and not just because it makes it very difficult to work in, but it ranges from about 0.6 meters to 1.5 meters, and you can only access usually by airboat. And so anytime we're collecting data out there, soil pores, Jamila, I'd like to talk to you about that at some point, but we're always operating from an airboat. Sometimes it's just easier to get out and walk, of course. And the last point I'd like to make about this is that this was historically and still is key habitat for birds along the Pacific Flyway. All right, however, that was the past, and now we're going to talk about the current state that the lake is in. And Malheur Lake has been modified over about the past 100 years, and so we are operating in a modified system. Initially, so one point I want to make here is this lake, the picture here shown in the bottom right, and how it diverges from that Dubert picture I showed earlier. So currently the shallow lake has minimal emergent vegetation. Often it's only located around the periphery of the lake, and no submergent vegetation within the lake. And so initially it was thought that carp were the main issue. And carp were introduced to the Sylvies River Basin in the 1920s. And since then, they've spread all throughout the lake and up into the Blitzen River system. And they were kind of public enemy number one. There have been many efforts focused on carp removal by Fish and Wildlife and ODFW down there. And this is just one picture, an example here of a carp roundup that happens every year. There's been some other work done to create electrical barriers. That's something that may happen soon to try to keep carp out of the Blitzen River watershed. And also rotenone, which, pros and cons, but so that is also used out there as one method to control carp. And our other coworker that I mentioned, James Pearson, did a whole lot of work modeling carp and when the best time would be to exploit the carp and try to kill a lot of them efficiently. I think there can be many presentations on carp, but we're all very familiar with, I think, the destructive suction feeding behavior that they have and how they can resuspend bottom sediments and affect the emergent and submergent vegetation in a lake. So this was kind of the first thought, but since then, since we've really kind of dove into Malheur Lake head first, I would say, our thinking has kind of evolved. And now we understand that the 1980s floods may have been a tipping point in this system. So now the fact is that it is in this turbid state with minimal vegetation. And if you dive into the literature and Sheffer and everything in his shallow lake textbooks and journal articles, they really explain that once it's in a turbid state, it is very hard to shift it back to a clear state. So we think that one of these tipping points may have been these 1980s floods that inundated the emergent vegetation and killed it. And then there were these subsequent years of ice, and the ice shear may have been one reason that we now have this very flat bottom. We no longer see that topographic heterogeneity that was present in the Dubert report in 1969. One other thing that in this modified system that you have to think about is that the water availability and water timing has changed. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But there are water diversions in the Sylvies River and in the Blitzen River watersheds. And in fact, a lot of the Blitzen River, even though it's on refuge territory, it has been channelized. And so we know that that's affecting the quantity and the quality of the water reaching the lake. All right, so through all of this, and luckily the basin received a focused investment partnership grant from OWEB back in 2016. And that has allowed us to do more, dive into more of the understanding of the lake with our partners, which again, US Fish and Wildlife Service and HDP, High Desert Partnership. And so we are documenting the current state of the lake. One thing to note here is that without this emergent vegetation and topographic heterogeneity that used to exist, this large open lake has a long wind fetch, and that creates wave action, which resuspends the bottom sediments. So in 2017 and 2018, we conducted a light study. It's a short name that we call it. The purpose was to determine the physical characteristics of the sediments and the erosional response to wave action, and also to evaluate the effect of those suspended particles on the depth of light penetration through the water column. And anytime I talk about light, we're talking about photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR, which you may know, but is between 400 and 700 nanometers, and that's the wavelength of light that photosynthetically photosynthetic organisms use. So we collected tons of data out there in 2017 and 2018, and here's just kind of a list of it. Some of these were discrete samples, some of them were continuous measurements for those 2 years. But I just wanted to touch on some of the key findings here. And again, this is kind of showing how we're progressing through our understanding of the lake. And one of the key findings is that there are 2 types of turbidity in Malheur Lake. And the first one is persistent turbidity that's always there. It's kind of like the baseline. And it's even present under ice. We have a few samples that were able to be collected under ice, which is very tough conditions out there in the winter. But then there's also this transient turbidity piece that is present when wind events exceed about 5 meters per second. Now, unfortunately, that is very common out there. And sometimes, you know, there could be peak events we see sometimes of about 12 meters per second. And so this is very common. Also, we found out that the bottom material is highly erodible. And in fact, a lot of the particulates on the bottom, the particle sizes are about 99% of them are fines, which is less than 63 microns. And so those fine particles strongly attenuate light. So if we look at this graph here on the right, you have your PAR along the X and depth in centimeters on the Y. And the key thing to take away is that most of the photosynthetically active radiation approaches 0 by about 20 centimeters into the water column. And as I mentioned, everybody down there is interested in restoration of the lake. And so there are actions that this information can kind of target. So restoration actions may target the persistent turbidity. For example, if you use flocculation, like alum flocculation, or transient turbidity if you were to establish wave reduction barriers, or of course you could try both to cut down the most. Okay, so this led to our 2019-2018 or 2019-2020 study, nutrient and suspended sediments. And a lot of the questions here, that we had, and that was kind of the purpose of the study, was, has the trophic status of the lake shifted? There are some minimal samples that were collected in the 1980s that we can compare to. And then also, what proportion of nutrients and suspended sediment are attributed to internal resuspension versus external loading? And so one purpose of this, again, in the literature, there are examples of this, that nutrient loading is one of these reasons that can cause a lake to shift from the clear vegetated to the turbid non-vegetated state. So we were very interested in categorizing the amount coming in from external sources versus internal resuspension. So in 2019 and 2020, we collected samples on the Sylvies River, the Blitzen River, and 3 sites within Malheur Lake during the ice-free periods. So this study, our nutrient and suspended sediment study, revealed the importance of activities in the watershed by documenting the quantity and the quality of the water reaching the lake. And so we monitored a ton of different things, and we're finishing up the analyses now. And so I just wanted to give a brief kind of overview of some of the key points. But we did document that concentrations of total phosphorus and orthophosphate are significantly higher now than they were during the 1980s. And it's likely because the plants are not available there to take up the bioavailable phosphorus.
So Casie, you have about 3 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So also though, in 2019, this is just an example here, the suspended sediment load in the lake increased substantially. And we were able to determine that about 2/3 of that was a result of internal resuspension, and that 1/3 of that was from the external inputs from the tributaries. So it's a substantial amount coming in from the tributaries, especially during these wet water years like 2019 was. And questions that relate this directly to restoration efforts is, could this external loading impede restoration actions? And over time, we believe this influx of suspended sediment and these fluctuating lake levels may fill any kind of topographic depressions through sedimentation, which is one thing that we're working towards, is to try to get back some of that topographic heterogeneity. Also, one thing to think about is, could there be an algal response to restoration? If we really are only able to achieve an increase in light penetration, but don't decrease the nutrient concentration, then there may be algae that can take that up and bloom in response to that. So we've collected some samples out there, actually quite a few over 2019 and 2020. And there is filamentous green algae like Spirogyra. There's also cyanobacteria that are there. And so that's something that we have to think through. All right, so now, of course, the more we study the lake, the more we learn about the complexity of the current state that it is. And for example, climate change is very real out there. And as I mentioned, in 2021, the lake got very small. Actually, our study that I'll touch on in 1 second dried up in July. The lake dried. So we know that is affecting the water availability and the timing in the basin, but also we have those land use practices in the Sylvies and the Blitzen watersheds that are further affecting it. And one thing to think about is it may be time to kind of reassess some of those practices that have been going on for about 100 years. Also, carp are still in the basin. They will not be eradicated. And so how do we adapt to that? The wind wave action continues to be something that we have to battle out there. And it affects the highly erodible lake bed. It creates high turbidity and high suspended sediment concentrations. And of course, that leads to a lack of submergent vegetation and minimal emergent vegetation. And one thing that we're also going to explore in the future is this idea of ice shear, which I'll touch on in 1 second. All right, so the last thing I want to—
Can you finish up, please?
Yes. Yes, the last thing I'm going to touch on here, and this is actually the last slide, is this pilot restoration project that is going on right now. This is in 2021 and 2022, and we are constructing mesocosms in the lake. And just for reference here, these are about 5 meters long on each side. And we are trying to determine which factors can be controlled to substantially reduce the turbidity in the water column and whether that will be enough to allow submergent vegetation to survive. And so, for example, we're using an alum phosphate treatment, and we're excluding carp and using this here. The bottom picture is a wave reduction barrier. So, oh, I lied, I did have one more slide. So future directions here, we are looking at other factors. We understand that the plants are always involved in this, and but we're looking at ice shear and trying to create topographic heterogeneity into the future, and trying to figure out what the best path forward to lake restoration is. All right.
Thank you, Casie.
Sure.
So are there any questions for Casie? So I guess I have kind of a comment that, you know, climate change might fix this problem completely if the lake gets so low that emergent vegetation is going to be within that region where par is sufficient for the growth. Have you been noticing emergent vegetation when the lake is low?
Yeah, we do. So in fact, this year in 2021, we saw a response to the very low water level. But the problem is that that vegetation isn't able to survive to the next year. And that's what we're trying to figure out, whether it's a soil moisture factor or whether it is ice shear or what it might be. But the seed bank out there seems viable. And when the conditions are right, you do get a vegetation response. So we just have to try to figure out that next step right now related to the vegetation. But I think you're right, Ron. I think that climate change is affecting this, and that's one thing that everyone's trying to really wrap their head around. We'll no longer have a lake like before the 1980s. What will be out there will be a different lake. And so that's been something kind of a tough to swallow, but I think that everybody's coming around to that idea.
I have a question or a comment.
Sure.
I'm from the Denzel Ferguson era. And so I'm absolutely amazed that you were able to talk for 20 minutes and not mention cattle. Because I know part of the management plan out there on the refuge, and I'm an ex-Fish and Wildlife Service employee also. So just so you know kind of where I'm coming from. There's still cattle grazing that goes on out there. And I know that they graze areas that are diked off from the river. And then once those areas are finished grazing, they're finished grazing them in the fall, then they open up the floodgates on the top end and the bottom end, and they flush the field. And there's an incredible nutrient load that goes into the Donner and Blitzen River. And it's like, and that's why I'm amazed that you could do all this nutrient analysis and never mention cattle. And I know that that is a can of worms out there. I was with Denzel in a bar in Burns one time, and we were asked politely, well, maybe not politely, but we were asked to leave.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you've taken any of that into consideration at any point.
Yeah, we certainly have. And actually in 2020, we took water samples upstream near Page Springs, since you're familiar with the area, and then downstream right when it enters into the lake. And we're comparing those concentrations. And as you expected and discussed, it is significantly higher, these concentrations for total phosphorus, total nitrogen, everything across the board, actually. So, you know, that is one reason that we're working with the refuge here. I think they realize that the channelization of the Blitzen and its disconnection with the floodplain is a major issue. And not just the cattle, but yeah, also they have wet meadows out there that that really do help with a lot of the migratory birds. It does provide food resources, but it also uses a lot of the water out there, so that keeps it from reaching the lake. So yes, I think that's a great point. And we did dive into that in the nutrient study, but I just didn't have time to talk about that. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time, so we need to move on. And I'm going to be the next speaker. And the title of my talk is Effects of Climate Change on Lake Abert. And this is with my co-author, Dorothy Hall. And I'm retired from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and Dorothy is with the University of Maryland and the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And the title of our talk is Effects of Climate Change on Lake Abert, Oregon. So Lake Abert is, let's see, somehow I missed, I'm sorry, I have to go back. I want to acknowledge some folks that have helped me over the years, and not only have they helped me with field work, but they've also given me assistance in other ways and encouragement. And over here on the left-hand side are Steve Vandenberg and Joe Eilers. And Steve Vandenberg actually worked on the geochemistry and hydrology of Lake Abert back in the 1960s, and with his co-author Ken Phillips published a baseline evaluation of the lake that has been extremely helpful. Joe Eilers, many of you probably know Joe. He's a professional limnologist that lives in Bend, and he's also been an OLA board member, and he's helped me numerous times. And I also want to mention Keith and Lynn Cruz over here on the right side. They operated a shrimp fishery that was called Oregon Desert Brine Shrimp at Lake Abert for over 30 years. And Keith was really instrumental in getting me interested in Lake Abert. And around 2010, he actually asked me, he said, Ron, can you look into what's happening to the lake? It seems to be changing. And that's been something I've been working on for the last 10 years. I also want to acknowledge the encouragement that I've gotten from Theo Dreyer from Oregon Lakes and Trish Carroll, who was an Oregon Lakes board member and is part of the Lake Abert advocacy team that OLA has. And finally, a friend of mine, Steve Shihai from Klamath Falls, has helped me measure the lake levels and salinities numerous times. Let's see, somehow I got past, whoops, yeah, okay. Lake Abert is located in South Central Oregon in Lake County, and the major source of water for the lake is the Chihuacan River, and which originates in mountainous areas to the west of the lake. As the lake flows down to the river, passes through two marshes that are altered wetlands, and there are irrigation diversions along the route before it gets to the lake. The lake has small springs around its perimeter, and there's also several seasonal creeks that flow into the lake, but the Chihuacan River is the major source of water. Lake Abert limnology. Lake Abert is very likely an ancient lake. Its basin started forming approximately 7 million years ago. It's hypersaline and has a salinity that's up to 6 times greater than the ocean. It's alkaline, and it's a soda lake, and it has a pH of greater than 10. It's also a terminal lake, meaning that water exits only by evaporation. It's also episodic and rarely fills. And like Malheur Lake, it's quite shallow, and average depth is probably less than 1 meter, but has extremely large surface area, 65 square miles, similar to Malheur Lake. The variable hydrology and the salinity that we're seeing now causes ecological instability that unfortunately I'm not really going to get into in any detail because of time. When the salinity is not too high, which unfortunately is becoming less frequent, Lake Abert is highly productive, supporting a large biomass of brine shrimp that you can see over in the upper left top, and alkali flies over on the right side. And here's what the shoreline of Lake Abert looks like in some years. The flies are actually so numerous that they can turn the lakeshore black, like it was covered with tar. There's also highly diverse microbiota consisting of salt-tolerant bacteria, such as we have in this microbial mat, and cyanobacteria, and a group of organisms that I wasn't really familiar with called archaea, which are primitive and they're red pigmented, and they may actually be able to survive living in salt for short periods of time because they're highly tolerant of salt. And the other dominant organism in the lake is the algae called Ptenocladus. When the lake salinity is not too severe, it attracts thousands of water birds of many species, some of which I've shown here on the right-hand side. And the water birds come to the lake to feed on the flies and shrimp. And some of this, such as the Wilson's phalarope, shown here in the bottom, this pair, and down here, these birds, these phalaropes, bathing in the springs along the shoreline of the lake. They actually will feed very heavily on the brine shrimp and flies and put on so much fat that they may temporarily not be able to fly. And they do this because they have to make this long distance migration, which includes going to salt lakes in the southern part of South America. As many as several 100,000 Wilson's phalaropes are attracted to the lake in July and August in the good years to feed on the shrimp and flies. When present, the birds are spread out across the lake, such as you see here in this video. The birds swim in circles, and by doing this, they create a vortex that will bring prey to the surface. The birds spin both clockwise and counterclockwise, but there may be a tendency for some birds to spin one direction most of the time. In 2014 and 2021, Lake Abert became almost totally dry, as you can see in these two photos. This has not happened since the 1920s and 30s. Thus, the objective of our study was to better understand what may have caused these historically rare events. So, in terms of methods and results, to understand what factors may have caused or contributed to the 2014 and 2021 desiccation event, we looked at precipitation measured at 3 snowtail sites that are located west of the lake. And as you can see circled here, prior to and during the two events that occurred, the precipitation was well below average. The 0 line across here represents what would be average, and everything below that line represents less moisture than average. So based on this, there's good evidence that drought probably has had an effect on the lake. We also looked at the river discharges in the Chihuacan River, and we did this by looking at the cumulative flow on a water year basis. And as you can see here in 2012 and 2014, there was a decline in the discharge of the lake. The same thing occurred in 2019, but it was even more severe. And as you can see here, where the red arrow is, this is 2021, and there was almost no inflow into the lake during the spring. In a normal year, you would have this really dramatic increase in flows during the snowmelt period in the spring. So the next thing we looked at was the hydrology of the lake to see if we could get some idea of what was going on. And we looked at the hydrology, and the first thing we noticed was that there was a period prior to 2005 when the lake showed relatively small changes in surface area, and that it was related to sort of decadal scale events. And then beginning around 2005, the lake went through a lot more variation, both in timing and in magnitude of those changes. And additionally, we looked at some nearby lakes, such as Goose Lake over here on the right side, and the two of the Warner Lakes, Heart Lake and Blue Joint, down at the bottom. And you can see that beginning around 2000 or 2005, these lakes experienced the same kind of changes that we saw at Lake Abert. And over here at the bottom right, at Blue Joint Lake, you can see beginning around 2000, there was this dramatic decline in lake area, and there was a little bit of increase prior to 2010, but after 2010, there has been no measurable surface water in Blue Joint. And so that really dramatizes, I think, the effect that climate change is having on the lake. So I think we inferred that based on this evidence of precipitation and inflows, that climate change is having a dramatic effect on not only Lake Abert, but other lakes in the region. And because there's also irrigation diversions on all of these systems, that they are probably having an effect also. So in conclusion, recent desiccation events likely caused a drying climate, and a drying climate has serious ecological implications for Lake Abert, especially to birds like phalaropes that need abundant invertebrate food to provide fat reserves for their long distance migrations. 3, we believe that there's a need for a statewide water monitoring and management plan that considers aquatic ecosystems. That's something that's completely lacking now. And let's see, so I lost my last one. Whoops. And finally, we believe that remote sensing provides valuable information about lakes and should be used to help monitor Oregon lakes. This conclusion is further justified by the presentation of our next speaker, Dorothy Hall. But before Dorothy presents, I also want to say that I believe volunteers, just ran out of time, the volunteers can play a valuable role in providing information about Oregon lakes and should be part of any management plan. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And are there any questions? Steve, are you on? I think you're mute. You're muted, Steve. Steve, you're muted.
Ron, I had a question for you. This is Eli Asarian. I was wondering, what's the data source that you used for that remote sensing of surface area? Is that something that is widely available, or is that some custom thing that you did, or is that answered in the next presentation?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good question. Yeah, the satellite data is from a USGS website called Earth Explorer, and you have to have a GIS program to. It's basically you download the data right into the GIS program to make measurements.
Ron, this is Mark Sitzma. Do you have any idea where the birds are going when the lake is dried up?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mark. Yeah, unfortunately, the only other two really productive saline lakes that support these kinds of bird numbers are Great Salt Lake and Mono Lake. And of course, those are hundreds of miles away. We did see several thousand phalaropes in Tule Lake this summer, and that's something that hadn't been seen before. So I suspect these birds are dispersing, trying to find food sources, but there's just not, other lakes that have the size of invertebrates, the brine shrimp and the flies that these birds can feed on in high numbers. So, that's one of the concerns that we have, is that they may not, find food.
Is anybody doing population estimates in their breeding grounds, or populations crashing, or any idea about that?
Yeah, there is some work being done with colleagues in South America, and we're trying to get a handle on, population sizes and fluctuations, but it's just getting started. And it's very difficult to estimate the numbers of some of these lakes, especially in South America, where most of the lakes are pretty remote. Many of them are on the east side of the Andes and not readily accessible. But those efforts are ongoing, and hopefully in the near future, we should be able to answer that with a little more certainty. Okay, I think we should move on to the next speaker. I want to remind everybody that there are abstracts on the OLA site, and if you have questions, please be sure to contact the speakers. So Dorothy Hall is our next speaker, and she's a research scientist with Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center, University of Maryland, and the Cryospheric Sciences Laboratory, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Quite a mouthful, Dorothy. And the title of her talk is Effects of Climate Change on Great Basin Playa Lakes in Oregon, Initial Studies Using Mostly Satellite Data.
Hey, thanks, Ron. I think I have successfully shared my screen.
Yep, we see it, Dorothy. Thanks.
Great. Yes, so Ron and I have been working together for, I don't know, the last year or so, and it's been very interesting, and it's resulted in writing a proposal that was selected for funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. So my co-authors on this are Ron Larson and Nick DiGirolamo. Nick is with SSAI and Cryospheric Sciences Lab at NASA Goddard. The objective of our work is to evaluate the drivers of lake desiccation in a study area in Eastern Oregon. And we do this during what we call the MODIS era, which is approximately a 21-year study period, using mainly MODIS satellite data, because we want to get the big picture,
I know it's not
just
muted.
looking at the lakes, but the lake basins as well. And we've used.
No, it's video has an exit, not the
Did I?
Hey, Lynn Cruz, can you please mute yourself?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Everybody else, check if you're muted. And,
I wasn't sure if I was being heard. Anyway, so we use primarily 3 MODIS data products to do this, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I don't need to go into the importance of the playa lakes. Ron certainly did that, and we all know they're important for the the migrating birds and can be hazardous to air quality. And they also hold great significance to some American tribes. So there are lots of reasons that I think everybody is familiar with, that these lakes are very important and we don't want to see them dry up, but that's actually what we're seeing, at least in the recent drought. Our study area is in South Central Oregon. We're looking at 5 lake basins. 4 of them are lake basins of terminal lakes, Lake Abert, Goose Lake, Surprise Valley Lakes, and the Warner Lakes. And we also looked at the Upper Klamath Lake Basin as well. You can see the red outline of our study area. And this is the Great Basin, the white outline here of the Great Basin. So
Hey,
this
Dorothy,
is part,
I'm just going to mute
this is part of a
everybody.
3-year multidisciplinary NASA-funded project to evaluate terminal lake desiccation in the Great Basin. And this is the title of our proposal. I'm the principal investigator, and the co-investigators are Kimberly Casey of USGS, Kelly Gleason, Portland State, Bryant Loomis of NASA Goddard, Nima Palavan of SSAI, and also NASA Goddard, with collaborators Ron Larson and Crystal Schaff at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And of course, Laura Jansen from PSU is a student who's also on this project. So a little bit of background on MODIS and the satellites that, for the data from the satellites that we used in this study. In case people aren't familiar with MODIS, I'll just explain that MODIS has been on the Terra satellite since its launch in 1999. We started getting the first data in 2000. So that's almost 22 years. It was launched in December of 1999. And about 20 years for the Aqua MODIS. MODIS is on both the Terra and the Aqua satellites. It stands for Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer. The instruments have 36 channels. They're more or less identical in different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. And these data are used to develop geophysical data products for studying land, oceans, and atmosphere. And we're using some of the land products. And we also use Landsat and Sentinel data to measure the surface area of the lakes, primarily Landsat 7 and Landsat 8, and of course Sentinel 2. I want to show this little movie. The Terra and Aqua satellites are and Landsat, part of a fleet of Earth observing satellites that NASA has ongoing. Now, all of these satellites aren't necessarily viable all at the same time, but you can see that there are a number of Earth observing satellites that are circling the Earth and getting information on various aspects of our planet. And we focus on MODIS, of course, and just to show you an image, we have a snow cover map from MODIS in the left in the eastern US. You can see the snow in the various shades of blue and white, and the land non-snow covered is green. This is from the 7th of December in 2002 when it was unusually clear. But we have a 21-year plus record at 500 or 1 kilometer spatial resolution, automated production of these products, and they are validated products. That doesn't mean that the products are perfect, but what it means is that we understand what the uncertainties of these products are. They've been used for 20, 21 years plus, and worldwide by researchers and modelers. And we pretty much understand what they can do and what they can't do by now. And that's all documented. So that's what we mean by validated products. These products are amenable to creation of Earth science data records, which we have for all of the MODIS standard data products, and ultimately climate data records. You can develop a climate data record after about 30 years of data are available. We're not there yet with MODIS, but following the MODIS is the VEERS. The VEERS will go through the 2030s. So by 2030, between the MODIS and the VEERS, we will have climate data records of these products that I'm talking about, and many other geophysical products as well, because the MODIS instruments are not going to last much longer. They have lasted for, as I said, 20 and 22 years. They had a projected 3-year lifetime. So they've done pretty well. For this work, we use the following NASA standard land products: snow cover, land surface temperature separated into daytime and nighttime products, and evapotranspiration. So on the left, we're looking at the drought conditions from the US Drought Monitor in Oregon in early July 2021. I know that you're much more familiar with the drought than I am because I'm on the East Coast. And I've been following it pretty closely, but it's just incredible how dry it has been in parts of the Western US, especially lately. In July, you can see that there was exceptional drought, which is the darkest red, and extreme drought, which is the red color. And by the 23rd of November, on the right, that has expanded. Both reds have expanded. So the drought has just gotten worse in Eastern Oregon since then. And it's really into the mega drought category. And this shows our little 5-basin study area in Oregon and Northern California, and also the lakes that we are studying. But in addition to that, you can see the location of the agromet meteorological stations that we use. We use 6 stations that were within the basin area or just outside. And the results are consistent. Every single one of those stations show an increase in temperature over that time period that we're calling the MODIS era, which is from 2000 to the present. The mean air temperature, if you average all those together, the mean increase, I should say, is 1.3 degrees Celsius for that area. And we also looked at the mean surface temperature from the MODIS standard land surface temperature, or LST data products. And there's a mean increase of about 0.65 degrees Celsius, with most of that occurring during the nighttime. Now, I should point out or remind everybody that the surface temperature and the air temperature are not the same thing. In fact, they can be quite different. Air temperature is usually measured at about 1.2 meters above the ground, and the surface temperature is right at the surface. The skin temperature, or as measured from space, it's called the land surface temperature. And they're not the same, but they generally show the same trend, and they do in this case as well. So here we have maps on the left showing trends of land surface temperature from MODIS. And basically what we're looking at on the left are the daytime on the top and the nighttime on the bottom maps on a pixel by pixel basis, showing the increase in or decrease in temperature, land surface temperature, for that within that MODIS era. The oranges and red, or oranges really, that indicates increasing temperature, whereas the blues, which you can see in some of the pixels of the daytime one on the top, that indicates cooling over time. But the mean basin increase for the daytime is 0.43 degrees Celsius, and for nighttime, the mean basin increase is 0.87 degrees Celsius. That's on the bottom. So it's much more consistent increase at night. And also for the nighttime data, you can see on the right, showing the statistical significance of each pixel. So on the in the nighttime, there are more pixels that are statistically significant for warming as compared to daytime. Red indicates that they are significant for warming, whereas the green, some of which you can see on the top, indicates statistical significance for cooling over that MODIS era. Using MODIS snow cover products, we also looked at the number of days of snow cover in this 5-basin study area, and find, if you look at the graph at the bottom, we find that there has been a general decrease of about 30, let's see, where is it? Sorry, it's covered up on my view of my slide here. But you can see a general increase over time, with the highest snow year in this data period record being in 2008, and the lowest year for snow cover in the basin is in 2015. That is for the number of days of snow cover in the water year. And so on the top, the two maps show 2008, which shows a lot of yellows and blues, indicating a large number of days of snow cover, especially in the western part of this study area. And on the right, 2015, a lot of very dark red, indicating even under 10 days, in some cases, of snow cover during that year, the year 2015, obviously one of the big drought years. Another way to look at it is to look at the snow cover on April 1st. So what we're showing here are the lowest year, which was 2001, and the highest year, which is 2012, in this MODIS era time period that we're studying. So in 2001, the purple and white areas are pixels showing snow cover on April 1st, 2001. They're not very many. They're 3,916 square kilometers. Whereas on April 1st, 2012, there are a lot, 32,706 square kilometers. Just to show you what the map looks like, the difference between the lowest and the highest. Typically, not surprisingly, if you look at the DEM, you'll see that there's correspondence between where the snow stays later and the elevation is higher, because obviously it's colder there.
So Dorothy, are you about ready to finish up?
Yes. How many minutes do I have?
One.
Okay. Quick go through the evapotranspiration, indicating here that, yes, the same pattern. We have greater evapotranspiration from the MODIS product over time. You can see that in the maps and also at the graph at the bottom. My final slide before the conclusion is from Ron, and he showed this in his presentation, showing the measurements, and he's got like almost 100 measurements of Lake Abert since the early 70s from Landsat data. So in conclusion, of course, we have a couple more nice pictures from Ron, except they're not nice because they're indicating extreme desiccation of Lake Abert. But our data shows trends toward fewer days of snow cover, greater evapotranspiration, and higher air and LST temperatures, declining. But the declining trend in the number of days of snow cover is probably not the main driver of the extreme drought conditions in 2021. That's probably caused by the increasing air and surface temperatures and evapotranspiration contributing to the lake desiccation. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Dorothy. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do, Dorothy. This is Theo.
Hi.
How is that evapotranspiration measured? And is that a pretty accurate estimate?
That is one of the geophysical data products of MODIS, and it's a very complicated algorithm. So I don't even know how they do it. But the reason I was indicating that these products are validated is because People have been using these products for the last, well, 22 years, and all of the uncertainties are well known. Yes, it's pretty accurate. Exactly how accurate, I don't know. But you have to remember that there are a lot of issues with the MODIS data and the satellite data in general. We're looking at an area, in the case of the evapotranspiration, 500 meters by 500 meters. So we're sort of averaging everything, and we're only looking at clear days. So there are a lot of days during that record that are cloudy, and we're not getting any data. So from that standpoint, we're missing a lot of data, and it can't be a fully accurate representation of the evapotranspiration, even if the algorithm was perfect, just because we're missing so many days. So there are uncertainties, but yes, it is a good product.
And did you have, I know Ron mentioned that this year there was net evaporation over the winter. So did you reach a conclusion about evapotranspiration differences over recent years in the summer relative to and in the winter? Have there been different effects, or both have increased substantially?
That would be a very interesting thing to do. What we've done for this work, and we've only just really begun it, what we've done is averaged it. So we're looking at averages of 8-day periods, and we average it for the whole year. So it's, we can go in and look at individual periods of time, but we just haven't done that yet. And we're actually going to be working with the developers of that product next year, because there are a lot of things about that product that are so complicated that you really need the product developer there to understand everything correctly. But that would be an interesting thing to do.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we should probably move on. Our next speaker is Judy Sims, and Judy is a lake owner, and the title of her talk is "We Just Bought a Lake, Now What?" So go ahead, Judy. There we go. We can see your screen now. You want to do it full screen?
Unmute here. You hear us now? Are we audible now?
Yeah, we can hear you. You just need to go to full screen.
Yeah, go to full screen.
It is full screen. Oh.
There you go.
Hi, this is Dick Lykin. I've been a member of OLA for a number of years. Mainly, you know me through the work on the Atlas of Oregon Lakes. I'm not a limnologist. I'm not a biologist, but Judy is my only friend that owns a lake. In fact, my only friend that bought a lake in the past year, and she's going to talk a little bit about their experience about searching for a lake and the first year of ownership.
Thank you, Dick.
And the first few slides are on autoplay, so they'll just kind of scroll through them by themselves, and she'll comment at the end of them.
Okay, so after visiting over 20 river or lake waterfront sites in Oregon and Washington, my husband Harry and I discovered Spaniel Reservoir property, actually on the day that it was first listed on the market. We closed escrow last June. We've been looking for well over 4 years since moving to Oregon from California 6 years ago. So back in 1974, I wonder what resources Mr. Spaniel used in designing the construction of the permitted reservoir. Today, Oregon State Extension Service provides guidance in building farm ponds, as do most other state extension services. So Mr. Spaniel built the reservoir, though neither he nor two subsequent property owners developed a lakeside residence. The most recent owner had developed and paid for engineering plans and some initial permitting, and he regretted having to sell the land. We were the fortunate beneficiaries of that. So since the watershed is largely contained on our 92-acre property, we do have the opportunity and the leverage to work towards maintaining water quality. So the reservoir was built before the National Wetlands Inventory began. And so building a reservoir at the site today might be more difficult. So some of these slides show the aging infrastructure and the role of beavers in controlling the water level. Here you see one of two 18-inch drain outlets, one at either end of the lake, and each one is completely covered by a beaver mound on top of the metal grid that is for the filtering through the drain. We had a problem with a cave-in and a deterioration of the metal grid. So you'll see that in another picture coming up. So the lake contains two distinct basins and likely was built on a low topographic divide. So while we've begun to learn more about the visible flora and fauna in and around the lake, we realize we have much to learn about water quality and lake water ecosystems. And so towards this end, we are excited about connecting with OLA as a step in the right direction. So a geotechnical report completed before purchase provided significant information. And here you see some of the team of people that we have hired or who are supporting of development. of the area that includes maintaining the lake. So one of our first investments by necessity, if we plan to build a home, which we do on an approved home site, is to have a fire access road, fire code approved. And so this is the construction that's happening as I speak. We hired an expert on pond maintenance who provided guidance on adding beneficial bacteria, and we're looking into native plant additions in and around the water. This is an example of a native water lily. We're excited about arrangements to install a wind-powered aeration system that'll have bubblers near the bottom of the lake in a circular around the lake bottom fashion. Here's the disaster that happened for us. We didn't even understand that the beavers had created something over a drain. We didn't realize there was a drain there until this happened. And in a very short period of a day or two, we lost 1.5 feet or more of lake water. And so we had to solve the problem, and we came together and did some amazing quick fix. But we are concerned about the reservoir's aging water control system and what to do about that. And of course, the beavers play a part of that. The water level is undoubtedly substantially higher now because of beaver activity over the years than it was originally intended and planned for by Mr. Spaniel. The water quality in the lake appears to be good. We have done some simple water testing, but we do realize there's a lot more observation and testing that we need to do as time marches on. In terms of concerns, we are first-time landowners, and lake owners in particular. We realize there is much to learn in caring for Spaniel Reservoir's drainage basin and complex ecosystems. In this picture, I'm standing on the earth dam, one of the earth dams, looking down at where there's an outflow of Grebe Creek. So we have a lot we'd like to learn about the long-term care of this resource, the land, the lake's drainage basin, and the lake itself. So we plan to manage Spaniel Reservoir for private recreation in ways that maintain its quality. And we never plan to develop a business out of it or anything other than keep it as a beautiful place in nature. We call it our sanctuary. We are new members of OLA and hope that our association will provide us with insights into how best to manage this resource. And we are hopeful for reestablishment of the Oregon Lake Watch Program and interested in participating as volunteers. So there's my husband on a recent foggy morning. You couldn't even see across the lake. We hope as we get to know this beautiful place to adapt our experiences in environmental education, as both of us are retired educators, into properly managing Spaniel Reservoir. And as lake ownership responsibilities unfold for us and future generations, this is my grandson, one of them, we realize that our lives are tied to the land, the trees, animals, soil, and water, and to one another. And we would be pleased to participate in the Lake Watch program when it becomes active again, and to use this as a vehicle to learn more about our lake, and hopefully our lake can provide some means for learning as well. We invite and welcome researchers who wish to use Spaniel Reservoir as a vehicle for lakes research. We'd like to thank the Oregon Water Resources of Washington County for their sharing of information about the lake. lots of files and folders. The water master person has given us a lot of information as well. Northwest Engineering, working closely with us. Regional State Forester, who is new to this region and had came on this property for the first time, was extremely helpful in helping us to understand the land and the lake and what we need to be looking at. The lake care people, Colsier and Hughes, have made a big difference for us too. And of course, the family members and friends who've taken pictures and given reports of sightings. This has been very helpful. We actually have 5 different cameras positioned up in trees to take pictures, some of which were in this presentation a few minutes ago. So we've been learning a lot about the wildlife through those cams as well. So thank you so much for this invitation to share about what we call Forest Lake Farm, and particularly the lake. My husband, Harry Sims, and I would be happy to connect with any folks that are interested. And Dr. Richard Lycan, my friend Dick, sitting next to me here, who got me into all of this, and I'm very glad he did. We all are excited about continuing this investigation, along with learning more about lakes and their care in general. And we thought perhaps you might have a few questions or ideas, but we did want to point out that there is a way to look at this full presentation at http SOA Portland, etc. as a resource. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity. Dick has been a wonderful inspiration and support in sharing this beautiful resource with you.
Thank you, Judy. That was a great presentation. We don't often hear from landowners, especially ones that have the concerns and the interest to protect and really conserve your lake. I mean, my comments, just looking at the growth of vegetation around the lake and the aerial views, tells me that you probably have a pretty healthy system with not that many nutrients coming into it. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the nutrients. Probably the concerns might be, some invasive plants that may already be in the lake. And the other thought I had was, if you don't mind the flooding that the beavers are causing, maybe you really don't need to do any improvements. Maybe you could just plug up those drains.
Well, that's what we've done.
Oh, okay.
We like the higher water level, and we like the beavers, and we honor and respect their ability to be incredible scientists and workers of the water and land. So we're excited. We've seen beavers. We've seen beaver families. I saw a small beaver carrying a single stick way down the middle of the pond. And it was one of the highlights of my life to see that. So we're very excited about this place. We'll tell you that 8 acres of the 92-acre parcel were never developed as timberland. So Douglas fir has been planted 15 years ago in the remaining acres, but not the 8 acres that include the lake. At this, and the trees are very mature and very beautiful, and it's a wonderful place.
Have you considered putting a conservation easement on the whole property, or at least?
Absolutely. My husband and I are definitely not wanting to be harvesting trees in the future. If we do it, we want to continue to appreciate and maintain and build on the biodiversity of the vegetation, all the flora. And we have plans to remove some invasive species like Scotch broom. And I don't know if you can see in this picture, there's a lot of canary grass that makes me angry. I've been trying to remove that from the bioswale at the school garden area at the school where I volunteer in garden education. And it's pretty hard to get rid of it, I think. But we definitely are are excited about sort of restoring as best we can. We also know that there's wetlands. This lake feeds at either end, spills into either Grebe Creek, which goes into another wetland not too far away, almost on our property, and the other direction with an unnamed flow out is also into wetland areas. So there's a lot of water. There's and there's springs that are filling this, so that even though we lost all that water quickly and the drain caved in, within a couple of weeks, the water level wasn't completely back up because it was middle of the summer, but the springs kept flowing and brought the water level back up much faster than we could have imagined.
So Amelia, I think you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for this presentation. I was wondering why, what motivated you to make plans to aerate the lake? Yeah, and if you could just talk more about that. Thanks.
That was part of the professional person or company that we hired to help us maintain and improve the quality of the water, the nutrient level and the oxygen and that kind of thing. I'm not going to give you a very good answer, but it was advice that we were given. But can you give me a reason for your asking that question?
I'll offer a comment here. Small privately owned ponds haven't really been so much of a focus of OLA. State extension services seem to have a lot of interest in farm ponds. If you Google farm ponds, you find almost all states will come up on it. And of course, the private consultants that advise people that own ponds offer advice. But you know, as we can see today, there's quite a gap between the scientific perspectives of the people who are doing research on lakes and the level of experience of people like Judy that have taken over ownership of lakes. And, you know, I'm wondering how OLA can address that gap.
Yeah, so I asked the question because it's a common method. So to back up, hi, my name is Amalia, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm based in Corvallis, Oregon. And I study, in particular, algal blooms in lakes across the US.
Yes.
I work mostly in very, very large lakes.
Yes, I enjoyed your presentation earlier this afternoon.
Well, I gave a presentation several weeks ago.
Or the other time, yes.
Session, yeah. And I was just interested because aerating the lake is a management mechanism that a lot of groups are very interested in for trying to prevent algal blooms from occurring. Oh. And so I wasn't sure if you were perhaps motivated by an existing problem on the lake. Yeah. But what I'm hearing so far is that that's not so much the case.
We haven't had what I would call an algal bloom. We have had some algae, and you know, the water of the lake, the temperature got very comfortable to the point where it was, you could swim by the middle of the summer. It wasn't really warm, but there's the shallower part of the lake, which is kind of in the middle. And we had what I guess is called pondweed that grew up from the bottom and across the top, and masses of damselflies would come and get the insects that would come to that area, and fish would be jumping up getting the damselflies, and lots of activity, lots of bats, lots of swallow type birds coming in and getting the insects. But I don't think, I'm wondering about algal blooms and where the threshold is of temperature and nutrient measurements and that kind of thing that we need to be paying attention to, because I certainly would like to avoid that if we can.
Yeah, I mean, you and everyone else would like answers to those questions.
Okay, I think Mark Sisma has his hand up. Mark? You're muted.
Yes, looks like a really beautiful property and a nice lake. I was going to ask the same question about the aeration. In my experience over the years, advising people on managing lakes, small lakes like this. It's not uncommon for people to recommend aeration when, just because that's something that you can actually see bubbles in the water. It makes you really excited. But I guess I would wait. If I were you, I'd wait and see if there's a problem before I do the aeration.
We definitely don't want to put systems of aeration on the surface with big bubbler fountainy things.
Yeah.
Anything we would do would be to bring more oxygen in. I think the trout that are in there, but I think that would be good to have some more oxygen. We have observed a fish habit that maybe has to do with them needing oxygen. I don't know. And it was the trout. They were gathered in an area of the lake that I think is where there's a spring coming in. We haven't, somebody other than myself kind of has identified where the springs are coming in. But these fish were agitating the water as a cluster severely. And it was an anomaly for this person who was helping us with lake care to witness this. And he's seen it several times. And I wondered if it was something to do with them needing more oxygen. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, I guess there's, unless you have a pretty severe algae bloom, I don't think probably that there's a problem with oxygen in the lake. I mean, there's ways to measure that, and you could find that out really easily and quickly.
Okay.
So I would actually measure it before I put any aeration in. The other comment I had was we were talking about invasive species, and the picture you showed was not a native species. That was looked like to me like an introduced water lily. So I would be careful about putting that in.
Really? We were told, because we were given lots of choices, and we said, no, the only thing we would be interested in would be a native species. So
well, maybe it's difficult to tell from the picture, but it looked like an ornamental water lily to me, and very invasive. So I wouldn't have that. The other comment, I think in some of the pictures, I thought I saw purple loosestrife in the background, but I could be wrong about that.
Purple what?
Purple loosestrife along the shoreline.
I don't know what that is.
It's a very invasive plant, so you might want to be careful with that.
Purple blue
strife.
Blue stripe. Okay. Thank you. Are you somebody I could talk to in the future, Mark?
Yes, I'd be happy to talk to you about
it.
Or I have Rich Miller. Rich, are you on the line? Rich Miller is also available. He's at PSU as well, and he can help you out on some of the plant identification. You could send us pictures and we can probably tell you what it is.
Yeah, I'm here and I'd be happy to help out. I can get in touch with you by email and give you some tips on taking pictures of plants so we can go back and forth with pictures and get a good idea of what sort of submerged plants you have there, what sort of emergent plants you have there, and very interesting talk.
I have taken, thank you, I appreciate that. I have taken a lot of pictures of individual plants, and they didn't all make it into this presentation, which we had a limited time for, but I would like to know which of the plants we have that are not native. And we have read that Oregon in particular is one of several states that has a very low population of native bees, bumblebees in particular. And we're hoping that we can plant some native wildflowers that'll promote pollination opportunities for bees. I mean, bees can come in and visit. And we've had some wonderful butterflies like tiger swallowtails and those little blue butterflies and several other varieties. Well, thank you very much.
Dick has all our contact information. So
thank you.
So Kurt Carpenter, you have your hand. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hey there. So thanks so much, Judy, for your talk. I'm excited for you and your lake. You know, you came to the right place. You really did. And tapping into the Oregon Lakes Association was really a great move. Mark Sitz spoke with from Portland State University and the Center for Lake and Reservoir Studies there, where I did my graduate work years ago. What a great resource. And Rich Miller can help you out there with the macrophytes. I'm sure that that you've kind of created this place. It's going to be a magnet for people like Rich and myself. I sent you some information or to Dan Lycan about some links to some studies on beavers actually in the Tualatin Basin. There's been a lot of activity looking at ecology in the Tualatin Basin right there in your backyard in East Fork Dairy Creek. We've got a USGS has operated a stream flow gauge there, and we conducted algae and invertebrate fish population surveys in East Fork Dairy Creek for quite a few years. And so I just encourage you to continue to reach out to these folks, and if you have questions, certainly the invasive plant issue that Mark raised is really a big deal. Really glad that he was able to spot that because we spend a lot of investment trying to get rid of those invasive plants with herbicides and things like that, and if we can get ahead of it by prevention at the onset, that's all the better. But
yeah, well, I'll get right on that, sharing some of the pictures I have. Thank you
yeah, well,
so
good
much.
luck. Good luck to you.
I have really enjoyed all of the OLA presentations in the seminar series that I've been able to listen to. There's a few I still haven't heard from last time, but I will say that the impression that I have is that we're fortunate. Here's a lake that doesn't seem to have a ton of problems. It does have some invasive species of plants, but
the other, and you're absolutely right. And your mention of how connected this lake is to the larger wetland system.
Yes.
In the upper Tualatin Basin is actually a really, really good point, and an issue that's sort of near and dear to my heart. I spent the better part of 5 years studying the plankton in the Tualatin River. And one of the things that we found was that there's just not as much natural plankton coming into the river far upstream, like coming from the tributaries, like where you're at. And I think it could be related to the term drought that we're in the midst of, but also disconnection of these wetland areas from the larger surface water and recruitment of, algae that's growing in your lake and zooplankton that might come out of your lake, that goes into the Tualatin River and it feeds an ecosystem. And the more we understand about that connection, the better. So kind of extending the invitation that Rich Miller offered to help you look at the macrophytes, the like rooted plants. I would be really happy to come out someday and with my plankton net and see what type of phytoplankton and zooplankton you have out in the lake, so you can have better understanding of what's in your backyard there.
Awesome. That is so exciting. We really need and relish that opportunity to learn and have that support. All right. I'm sure my time is well past. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you very much, Judy. You want
to Dr. Lycan here.
Yeah,
behind all this.
Stop sharing your screen. Okay, Theo. I'm going to turn it over to Theo, but I just want to say, I want to thank all the presenters. I think it was a great variety of talks, and I also appreciate the fact that most of them were presented by women, which is something that probably we don't see a lot of, and very encouraging. So thank you all for contributing, and thank everybody for listening in and asking some good questions.